I'm your cult boyfriend, and I think I'm a twihard now. Twihard. Okay, all right. God, that's the first time I said that out loud. Stephenie Meyer is maddening. She's infuriating because started investigating the the Twilight Saga. Um, I'm pretty open. Um, but I did go into it expecting to find a lot of problems with it. I went into the Twilight series of analyzing them, expecting to be able to shake it off quite easily. But New Moon, New Moon is fascinating. New Moon has like struck a chord deep within me, and I no longer think it's probably a good movie. I think it's a great movie, if not one of the most emblematic films um, of its time. It might be one of my favorite films. Honestly, I've had other discussions on this channel about the film New Moon, trying to figure out what it was that really felt so bizarre about the film and about the story itself. The first Twilight film, the Hardwick film, I don't like. I don't like the first Twilight film. I don't even really like the story, Meyer's story of the first Twilight film too much. But New Moon was different, and I could tell just by watching the film that the first Twilight movie is more like an auteur film. It feels like a more unique film than a studio film. It doesn't feel assembly made, and a lot of people would claim that as a benefit, as a virtue, and I would disagree only because it muddled Stephenie Meyer's worldview. It muddled her muddled her vision. It muddled Stephenie Meyer's vision. And when we're dealing with something like Twilight, that so perfectly, so intensely captured generations of people. I don't really want that vision to be muddled too much, especially if I'm new to it. So New Moon, I think it's obviously more of a studio film. It's simpler, but I think that compositionally it's simpler, and I think that's perfect. I think that it's a simple way to get Stephenie Meyer, author as auteur, across, because New Moon, as an adaptation of her novel, is one of the greatest, almost direct adaptations that I've ever seen, because it gets all of these themes across beautifully, as Stephenie Meyer seemingly would have intended, and the only changes that it makes are to make make something more cinematic than it would feel in literature. So my problem, not it's not a problem. All right, I had no problems with New Moon. In an earlier video on this channel, we had over an hour long discussion on the topic of New Moon, and it was incredible to me because I couldn't exactly figure out what the film was actually about. Is it about this love triangle? Is it about contemplating suicide? What exactly is this film about? Because all of your needs as a viewer are satisfied. All of your narrative needs are satisfied, but in a ricochet way, like not in a way that should theoretically happen. And this could speak to the fact that Stephenie Meyer isn't like a super trained writer. She is certainly a writer, but this was early in her career when she was like, I think, figuring out or awkwardly like reinventing accidentally narrative mechanisms, right? Because we don't peak with Jacob and Edward and Bella. We don't peak at that, which is what you should peak at least in the film. You don't. You peak at the Volturi. You peak with Aro and with Jane. You peak with them, but that doesn't make any fucking sense, right? Until you read the book. and I have read the book, and it's a beautifully direct adaptation to the film. And reading Stephenie Meyer's book, New Moon, really helped focus in on exactly what Stephenie Meyer was trying to do here. Um, first of all, author as auteur, even the most inventive parts of New Moon, like the changing of the seasons and the months, that sort of thing, to me, I will show you right now, I think it's just a direct adaptation from Stephenie Meyer's own inventive fucking thing. I shared this with Jacob from this channel, and I shared this image right here of how Stephenie Meyer chose to express the colorless, emotionless changing of the months. And Jacob was like, "What the fuck, Stephenie? Is this cinema?" It is cinema. Stephenie writes cinematically. She does not necessarily write as an author would, dealing with literature. It's kind of fascinating, and maybe that's what makes transferring her work like New Moon just so effortless. But New Moon did have that, I didn't know exactly what thread to follow, and New Moon told me exactly what thread to follow. Both the film and the book open up with a lovely quote from William Shakespeare. "These violent delights have violent ends, and in their triumph die like fire and powder, which as they kiss consume." Romeo and Juliet, Act 2, Scene 6. Now, the film doesn't necessarily make it clear what Stephenie Meyer's commentary on the Bard was. Doesn't exactly make it clear. And I remember that was one of my not a complaint. Once again, no complaints. I don't see this as Romeo and Juliet. Because I'm not, if any, like, Jacob in the film is Tybalt, and who would want to fuck Tybalt? But that was wrong. I was wrong. You read the New Moon novel, and Stephenie Meyer has a whole chapter called Paris. Stephenie Meyer hyperfixates on shit that no one would normally care about, and she makes it both holy and profane. I think that's where everything that's brilliant comes from. She has a whole chapter providing commentary on William Shakespeare, uh, where she likens Jacob to Paris, to Juliet's like original intended lover. The boring fuck who no one cares about. No one's ever cared about Paris as much as Stephenie Meyer has. No one has devoted as much time to investigating the Paris archetype and reclaiming it, re-examining it, and justifying it as Stephenie Meyer has. When I read Romeo and Juliet, I hyper-focus on Mercutio like a normal motherfucking person. Stephenie Meyer reads Romeo and Juliet, and she questions Paris. She questions suicide. She questions the act of the suicide. She questions whether or not, what if Romeo and Juliet had broken up, right? What if Rosalind had rekindled her love with Romeo, and Romeo went off with Rosalind? And what if Juliet was with Paris? And what if she did love Paris, not like Romeo, nothing like that, but enough that she wanted him to be happy too? But ultimately, Bella and Stephenie Meyer's commentary approaches, I think, such a beautiful point where she says she's reading too much into the story, that Romeo wouldn't change his mind. He wouldn't go with Rosalind. That's why people still remembered his name, always twinned with hers. Romeo and Juliet, that's why it was a good story. Juliet gets dumped and ends up with Paris would never have been a hit. So, like, she's telling you right there that, like, Jacob is just doomed. Like, Jacob is not a viable candidate. Like, Jacob is not an actual possibility, and never was, and neither was Paris. And there is a tragedy to the archetype of a Paris. And Stephenie Meyer is taking the opportunity within New Moon to really investigate this kind of humiliated archetype, the Paris archetype, which is fascinating. And there are parts of her book that do work like Romeo and Juliet in reverse. The film does this same thing. You walk away from the film, who is the most engaging character? It's fucking Michael Sheen. It's the Volturi. It's Aro. It's the fucking... it's Jane. It is Jane, and it is Michael Sheen. It's Dakota Fanning and Michael Sheen. And it's in reverse, so it's like there are Mercutio parts that come at the end of the film to provide a climax and give us this kind of focus, this really deathly and powerful and intense and brilliantly gothic focus, you know? a focus of mania, which is what Mercutio provides for Shakespeare. We kind of get that here in New Moon, but it's in reverse. It comes at the ending. And I've never seen something like that either. That is kind of fucking fascinating. And speaking personally, Stephenie Meyer writes brilliantly about a death drive fetish, or what could more accurately be described as self-destructive tendencies, contemplating suicide without actually contemplating it, right? Bella is despondent. It's new moon. It's blackness. We are entering a very gloom and doom period within the Twilight Saga. And it's one of the most relatable circumstances ever. I relate to Bella a lot in New Moon. I've done so many things. The only times, for a long time, I was going through a whole episode as Bella's going through a manic episode here of where you only feel alive when things are truly threatening. I want to fuck it up. I want to fuck it up. I want to fuck it up. And I feel so alive and I feel so alive and I feel. That's what's going on in New Moon. And it's working both ways. So the theme is focused in the book of, like we don't even really hang out with Jacob at all until almost 150-ish pages in. It's that theme, that rivalry between Edward and Jacob isn't immediately set up, because that's not actually what Stephenie Meyer is investigating. Stephenie Meyer is investigating the death drive fetish, the self-destructive quality that seems to define young lovers like Romeo and Juliet. What is Romeo and Juliet stripped of their suicidal definitions, stripped of their tragedy? They are nothing. We would not remember them. We would not know them. The narrative would not exist. So she's investigating that. I think she's investigating the predestination of a young adult series like this. You know, because for the first 100 pages, we're being set up with both Edward and Bella are contemplating suicide, and there's different peaks of the novel that are at near-death experiences. One of the most beautifully written chapters, probably in like young adult fiction. Oh yeah, and people like the shit on Stephenie Meyer's writing. It's written from the perspective of a 17-year-old. Like, it's fine. It's totally fine. Why would you make fun of the way that like a sentence is structured if it's structured by someone who hasn't graduated high school yet? Get the fuck out of here. This makes it feel more genuine. This makes it feel more gothically real, more important. But I believe the chapter is called, is it Pressure? I think it's chapter 15, Pressure, where Bella does jump off the cliff, and you get some beautiful writing. She starts to intensify her self-destructive behaviors, and to the point where she basically leaps to her death from a cliff. And she's doing this because these are the moments where, like, in the film, it's very, 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 very clear in those moments, like, Edward is there. I mean, in the book, it's almost, she accepts that even if they are hallucinations, they are so beautiful that she would die for them. And Stephenie Meyer keeps likening Edward to a god. And I did quite a bit of research in Stephenie Meyer to try to figure out what that meant. Like, what does Stephenie Meyer means when she says that Edward was like a god, or that Jacob was a gift from the gods? That Edward was a god, a vampire, and Bella wanted to become one. What does that mean to Stephenie Meyer? Well, as a Mormon, I did quite a bit of research on Mormonism just so I can properly understand Stephenie Meyer's nuances here. Mormons believe that they can or will become deities. They will become deified, or they will become gods. Bella certainly believes that here as well. If Edward is constantly compared to a literal god, and Bella can become that god, I mean, then the Mormon framework is here. It's visible, it's apparent, and it is both holy and profane. And that's where it gets so fascinating, because it is, I would not call this a sanitized book. There are kinks in here. What she likes to do is compare and contrast. Oh, no, it's not even compare and contrast. She's far more sophisticated than that, deliberately or not. she keeps she likens the sex symbol of the book of the films, even Edward, to an actual god. She is sexualizing God. She is sexualizing deification, or at the very least, she is romanticizing it to the point of a Romeo and Juliet esque sort of tragedy. But the passion involved there is imbued, imbibed in this becoming a god concept that Stephenie Meyer is fascinated with. So what we get is a beautiful blend of the holy and the profane. Because if Bella simultaneously wants to become a god, to become like Edward and to become like the Cullens, and also wants to be completely brutalized and destroyed by them, that is a level of coming of age sophistication that we don't ever see. I mean, it's a beautiful marriage, honestly, twinning of the holy and the profane. It's fascinating. It's fascinating. The book peaks several times at different situations where characters directly try to kill themselves. Edward tries to kill himself as well. He tries to get Aro and the Volturi to completely murder him. Jane is kind of my favorite here. She seems like a little fucking psychopath, and I can't wait to spend more time with Jane. She seems like a really cool villain, and I'm not even going to attempt to analyze her yet because I don't even spend a whole lot of time with her in New Moon, but just enough time to make me go, Dakota Fanning, you're having fun and I'm having fun too. Let's fucking blow my mind because you're already doing it. I can't wait to hang out with Jane some more. But seeing her here in New Moon, it's perfect for the film. It makes the film even that much greater because there's like a secret weapon involved, which is Dakota Fanning. And Dakota Fanning being a secret weapon within Michael Sheen, just doing his best interpretation of an androgynous Anne Rice coded fucking vampire is beautiful. It's beautiful. Michael Sheen is mind-blowingly good, and he's also having a ridiculously good time in this film. But there's something so incredible about the way that Stephenie Meyer really investigates the virtue of a suicide, or the virtue of self-destruction, the virtue of the expression of self-destructive qualities and attitudes. There's something like really beautiful about it. Because Bella wouldn't continue to do this if she didn't get validation from her god boyfriend, right? She wouldn't continue to be this chaotic when it comes to her own personal safety if she didn't see a hallucination or a vision of Edward each time that she did it. She wouldn't continue to do it. So there is a holy validation to something as morbid as suicide. Let that seep in. That's what makes New Moon still, it might be a fantasy romance, but it's still horror. That is still horrific to accept. And it's a fascinating thing to accept. Of course, they learn to be hopeful, but there is always hope. But there's also that commentary of Romeo and Juliet that Stephenie provided earlier, where Stephenie says, you know, it's not called Romeo dumps Juliet, so Juliet ends up with Paris. That's not what it's called. No one would care about that story if that's what it's called. I think that Stephenie Meyer might view suicide as denial, as maybe the most unforgivable denial, which is narrative denial. That we all have our own, we're all tragedians. We all have our own epics to work through. And we all know that we do. And suicide would be to deprive, to deprive finality, to deprive the climax, the narrative of its climax. And that Romeo and Juliet don't always have to die. In fact, sometimes they can live forever. And I think that Stephenie Meyer is fucking driving me insane, okay? She's driving me up the fucking walls. I become obsessed. I haven't been this obsessed with a writer, with a creator, since I first started really heavily getting into Kevin Williamson. Like, that's the level that I've been just fascinated by Stephenie's work. Um, there's a lot here that no one is engaging with. And this is probably the most engaged with material on the face of the earth, but it always seems to be wrong. There are angles to go here that no one's going through, that no one's approaching it at. There are angles that no one's fucking walking towards. And I would love to dive headfirst in them as if off a fucking cliff. New Moon is fascinating. It's one of my favorite films. Because to me, it might as well be directed by Stephenie Meyer. Because it's a simple, it's not even a distillation, it's a pure full expression of it. The only changes I think do help make the film a bit more filmic, as any good adaptation should. Curiously, Jacob is hypersexualized in the film New Moon. Hypersexualized. Stephenie Meyer really is uninterested in Jacob's abs. I mean, I don't think she ever describes them. The film makes you gaze. It forces you to gaze at Taylor Lautner's body. Because the film has to, because the book works separately. The book, you never actually believe that Bella is going to be romantically interested in Jacob in the same way that she was for Edward. So the film has to try to sell you on that because the film is using that as a pure theme. The book is using the theme of Jacob and Bella together as a way for Bella to get out of her suicidal tendencies. Whereas the film is using that as a Team Jacob, Team Edward dynamic. And so they have to oversell Taylor Lautner in order to compensate for how much Bella is completely entranced by Edward. So the film has to oversell him, and they oversell Jacob by over-sexualizing him. I don't think that is a flaw. I think that filmically you have to do that, or else there would be the majority of New Moon is Bella and Jacob hanging out. And unless you hyper-focus on Bella's depression, which I don't think would make for the most climatic, cinematic kind of experience, unless you're going to do that, and then you have to, if you're not going to do that, then you have to focus on the triangle itself. You have to focus on the triangle. And it's still vindicating Paris. It is still reclaiming and reinventing the Paris archetype. Absolutely. It is still doing that, and it's doing that in a way that Stephenie didn't even go for, which was maybe Jacob's even hotter than Edward. That's to consider as well. Also, the film ends with that great stinger of a proposal, which the book ends with a stinger of "Get in the fucking house, Bella. Get in the house. I'm Charlie." That's what the book ends with. So I think the film does a much better job at providing us with the Meyer-esque climax that's important, because it feels like you climax at the Volturi, at the verdict with Michael Sheen and Dakota Fanning in the film. That is the proper climax, but it gives us that stinger that I think Stephenie Meyer would be more concerned with, which is the proposal. So the proposal really reorganizes New Moon in its final seconds, so that you understand that the film is, at the end of the day, a romantic horror story, and this proposal is far more important than any amount of scene chewing that Michael Sheen could do, and any amount of staring that Dakota Fanning could employ. God, Dakota Fanning was so fucking good in this. Michael Sheen and Dakota Fanning. God, the coolest fucking characters, man. I love hanging out with Jane and Aro. They're so good in New Moon. My God, they're great. But Stephenie Meyer is truly turning me into a crazy person. You know, like, I read her book in like a day. I read New Moon in one day. I know it's not the most like complicated fucking book out there, but I mean, I typically don't go through like 560 something pages in a few hours. I normally don't do that. I couldn't put the fucking thing down. I was enthralled. I was fascinated with New Moon, and I mean, I still am. There's a lot here. New Moon is one of my favorite films because this New Moon story, I think, is a fascinating piece of media, multi-textual media. Absolutely. Uh, I think the fact that it was written by someone who didn't spend her life writing novels makes it that much more experimental. Because, yeah, it is a ricochet sort of satisfaction that you get as a reader, but you still get the satisfaction, and the ricochet leaves you with a beatific whiplash. And I love it. I absolutely like love that feeling because it comes from the least expected places, the most unexpected ones. It's this fucking intense, Stephenie. Like, how did you do this? I don't know how you did it. I mean, I know how you did it, but did you know you were doing it? Are you a fucking genius? Are you a genius? I really am leaning towards yes. Stephenie Meyer is a genius. I'm very sympathetic to that idea, to that concept. Yeah, but Bella is so relatable. Novel is very relatable. I mean, I'm 31. It shouldn't be as relatable as it is, but fuck you and fuck me, man. Like, Bella is intensely relatable in New Moon. I'm recently coming out of my new moon, out of my blackness, into some new beginning. Um, gosh, I I stopped being an adrenaline junkie. I stopped being so attracted to my own demise and started to, I guess, be hopeful. We all have these narrative things in play. Like, we all are part of, like, our lives narrative. And I think that suicide is in Stephenie Meyer's worldview, not simply a denial, but I think more accurately, a rejection of the narrative that's planned for you, whether that be divine or philosophical. It's a rejection of both. We all have narratives built up and we all see them moving. And suicide, self-destructive tendencies, death drive fetishes humiliates the narrative of our own lives. And every good story deserves to be told. So Stephenie Meyer's book is actually like emotionally helping me. Like, it's an emotionally helpful book. Because it's not telling me that, and it's not telling Bella or Edward that their suicidal thoughts are wrong, that they're invalid. It's not about that. It's not telling her, she's not telling her readers, her viewers, her audience that depression is a mistake. She's telling us that depression is a necessary arc within a larger framework of the narrative that our lives are following. And that suicide is a rejection of your own narrative, of your own climax, of your own love story. That suicidal thoughts are not only necessary, they're integral. They're a part of the framework, but you can't give in to them lest you reject the greater story entirely, lest you reject the bard. You kill yourself, you reject Shakespeare, and no one will remember you. Or they won't talk, they won't speak of you. Not the way that they should, not with the fullness of the narrative. In a tangible reach. Stephenie Meyer and her reinvention of the vampire is fascinating. She's one of the most important people in vampire symbolism and in werewolf symbolism. I think that the work that she did with Jacob on this book and in the film, the film adaptation of it, is one of the most interesting representations of werewolves I've seen. I mean, I think werewolves are far more applicable to coming of age stories than vampires are, because vampires will never come to age. You see, like Bella has this wonderful thing about her where she's always too old. Always. Like it's in New Moon where she is has so much anxiety surrounding her age. She's older than Edward now, and she will always be older than Edward, and she will always be older than Jacob, even if it's just arbitrary by a year or two. Always be too old for Jacob, and now she's older than Edward. She is always aging, and then this theme of age is transferred over truly to the werewolf and vampire archetype. The vampire archetype, um, the whole attraction there is that it is unaging. It's beautiful forever, unearthly, godlike, divinely beautiful forever. The werewolf is a walking embodiment of dynamic and constant progress and change. You know, most werewolf metaphors are about sexual or spring awakenings, right? It's about coming of age, coming into maturity, uh, coming to terms with your own libido. And the werewolf metaphor is always about the dynamic change. Even the transformation into a werewolf is a transformative thing inherently, correct? Intrinsically so. It is werewolves, part of their inherent fucking symbolism, part of the metaphor of a werewolf will always be transformation, because werewolves are intrinsically transformative. Vampires, opposite. They're the opposite of that. So Bella is far more attracted to the stasis, to the divine stasis of becoming a vampire. She's far more interested in being forever 17 than she is in the unending dynamic transformation that could be given to her by a werewolf like Jacob. I think that's intensely relatable as well. Because I think Stephenie Meyer thinks that sentimental ambition is a truthful thing, that melodramatic sincerity is a beautiful thing, and that those things, sentimentality, melodrama, sincerity, are best expressed by teenagers. And if you can choose to stay within that philosophy, that mental framework, that emotional universe forever, then you absolutely should. It would make you a god among the dispossessed, among the disheartened, among the disenchanted, that you should stay forever 17. Always. A werewolf is a fascinating thing, but a werewolf is uncontrollable. Maturity is unknowable. Maturity is constantly transforming. You're constantly getting older. You're constantly morphing into something unrecognizable, something untamable, a monster. With a vampire, with being a teenager forever, you get to be sincere forever. Eternal life, in Stephenie Meyer's philosophy, is eternal sincerity. I suppose I'll end this by saying that Stephenie Meyer is an obscenely brilliant woman, and that New Moon is one of my favorite films that I've seen in an extremely long time. And then Twilight is a landscape of fascinating iconography. And I find Stephenie Meyer's worlds and her characters, her New Moon, positively irresistible. Thank you for watching. I'm your cult boyfriend. This has been Moon Discourse. And it was my pleasure bringing this video to you. Like, share, subscribe. I don't really care what you do. Do something or do nothing. I don't care. Thank you for watching.